Hello, and welcome to the Power Score LSAT podcast, episode 17. This is John Denning in Los Angeles.
And this is Dave Kaloran in Napa Valley.
I'll start by asking, how you doing up there, man?
I'm not doing that well.
I know. I knew the answer to that question before I asked it.
It's contrary to the way I usually feel, which is I usually feel really good, but I have got a terrible sore throat. And so that is going to probably limit my ability to participate today.
Nah.
It's also limiting what I'm drinking because I am drinking tea with honey.
Yeah. Well, shame on you, but no, I do sympathize.
There's no shame in that. Sickness is one of those things that occurs. I'm just disappointed about it because it's summer, it's warm, and you get one of these summer colds and it sucks.
Yeah, I can barely speak. Let's do a podcast. Brilliant.
Well, we need to talk about these issues. So.
Unfortunately, there are some issues that cannot be postponed.
Yes.
Speaking of those issues, in my cocktail, I've gone head first. I've got a coffee here to try to keep me awake through this thing, but with way too much Jameson in it. The old Irish coffee.
Well, the best I have
maybe
for you
shame
there.
On me.
You should just have one of those Irish car bombs. That's a great drink.
It is a great drink. I'll save the Guinness for afterwards, but there are some upstairs.
I am actually well known around here for calling for those at the end of the evening, just to make sure everybody goes home unable to walk.
What a wonderful reputation.
It is actually not bad.
Yeah, I know.
I've been scolded more than a few times by people over, you wrecked my husband. I'm like, sorry about that. Actually, it's his fault. He needs a greater tolerance.
Fantastic. Well, speaking of people getting wrecked, is that a bad segue?
Oh, come on, man.
Yeah. Let's talk about the music.
Let's talk about the music. And this is a really interesting song. The song choice, first off, is an old rap classic.
Yeah.
This is from the Ghetto Boys, and the song is Mind Playing Tricks on Me. And this was going to be the song no matter what the topic was today, because there were a couple of different guys in Ghetto Boys who were the main dudes, Willie D, Scarface, and Bushwick Bill. And last week there were reports that Bushwick Bill had died. And then it came out that he hadn't. He'd been sick for a long time. And then unfortunately a couple of days ago it was confirmed that in fact he had died. And so this was a classic rap group that I think, rap aficionados would know, but not really. I don't know if everybody
would you call it mainstream? I don't know if they quite.
It's really hard to say.
Made it to the collective consciousness.
Let's put it this way: somebody like Eminem actually came out and said, Bushwick Bill was a legend. I think his abilities is well known to people who are into it. And I'm not a gigantic rap fan, but I was definitely a fan of the Ghetto Boys. They were excellent. And so we used to listen to them in the early days of like when I was doing LSAT preparation. We'd be out on campuses putting up flyers and we were driving around playing their music. It was great. So I was really bummed out to hear that he was this sick and that ultimately that he had died. So I was going to choose that song anyway.
There you go.
But then this week has just been, I'd say, borderline insanity with news coming out of LSAC on all different fronts and just the lack of certainty over a lot of different things. So when I woke up, I'd seen the reports of the new repeater policy that LSAC has implemented, which we are going to talk about today. And my first thought was, this can't be real.
My mind's playing tricks on me. Yeah, there you go.
My mind's playing tricks on me. I'm like, man, Bushwick Bill knew this was coming, and so he took the perfect moment.
No, he made the right decision. Clearly.
If he had been involved in LSAT preparation, he definitely would have made the right decision to step out now.
Yeah, it's weird to say that I'm envious of Bushwick's departure.
At least he doesn't have to deal with this stuff that we're dealing with. So. Anyway, that was the song.
That's a bit dark, but it does lead us into where we're going with this.
It really does, and it's amazing that it tied in that well, because that was going to be the song. That was their biggest hit. It's a great song, and Bushwick comes in about the last minute and a half and makes his crazy rap about Halloween and beating up this guy that turns out not to be real. So if you have never heard the song, definitely go listen to it, and you might discover, wait, I have heard this before. So
Ghetto Boys, did they do Damn It Feels Good to Be a Gangster?
They sure did. That's from Office Space.
There you go. Yeah, right. They beat up the printer.
The song that we really liked was I Ain't With Being Broke, because we were poor at that point in time and really struggling. I was eating ramen. and living in Los Angeles and trying to get by. And that's what we always were like, we're not with being broke. We just hated that. So it's got good memories for me.
There you go.
And for others that
pour
are
one
out
out
there.
for Bushwick.
Yes, man. Good for him. All right. So on that note, that auspicious note, let's talk about the many updates that are swirling around the LSAT right now. And of course, as a setup, everybody knows that the final all-paper North American administration that was given in June is now over. We're waiting on scores. We got like another 13 days or 2 weeks for those.
Yeah.
And so we're sitting here waiting for that to happen. And they have been making update after update that is related to the forthcoming July LSAT, which is the 50-50 test, and then the September and October tests and so on, which are the all digital exams. So let's start off with some of the, I'd say, more benign developments that we actually had this week.
Sure. God, where to even begin? Swirl is the right word, man, because it feels like every day we've woken up and there's been a new thing. Let's start with their podcast. This is always the most benign place, I think, to start, or the least impactful.
It's because it's so short.
That's right. Yeah.
5 minutes and 55
just shy
seconds.
of 6 minutes.
Yeah.
Their podcast. So we've already eclipsed them talking about Bushwick, I think. They're talking about test numbers for the most part. June 2019 test numbers. There were, I believe, just shy of about 19,000 registrants for the June test. I think that was it. July is peaking a bit, or has spiked. 26,000 or so, over 26,000 for July, which is expected. We knew July was going to be a big test with the cancellation.
Yeah, they wanted it to be a big exam, and so this is something that I'm sure they're pleased about. Mm-hmm. And, it's a significant number of registrations. That's not how many people are ultimately going to take this test, because some people will...
You'll get some withdrawals, you'll get some,
Yeah.
But 26,000 registered for it, that's a big test.
That's solid.
Again, I mean, this has been the test that you and I know at least, have advocated for pretty loudly.
Well, you've got so many good pieces of benefit that are coming out of there. Mm-hmm. And I just coined that term, pieces of benefit.
Yeah, no one quote him on that. David is least eloquent.
Well, yeah, I'll have my moments. I'm going to blame being sick on my lack of eloquence here.
I'll blame your tea.
Well, obviously, you get this preview your score, which is a huge thing. And then you also get to use, if you cancel, you get a coupon or a fee waiver to apply to a future LSAT.
Which we've learned something about. I'm not going to spoil it just yet, but we will talk about that fee waiver's applicability.
Yeah, we'll come back to that because I think that's an important point. Let's deal with that separately.
Right.
So you do have some really nice benefits that are coming out there, and I think that a large registration is a good thing, not just for test takers, but for LSAC as well.
For sure.
So, and we'll talk more about how that all works when we do our Crystal Ball webinar on, I think it's July 2nd at 8 p.m. Eastern.
That's right.
So we'll talk a little bit about what they want to get out of it, how that's going to affect the test administration, as well as what you can learn beforehand about that test and how to attack it.
Yeah, go sign up for that, guys, if you haven't.
Yeah, we'll post the link with that as well.
Right. But they also gave some information, some stats about the previous testing year, which I thought were interesting. Very nearly 139,000. I think the final number, don't quote me on this, but I believe it was 138,597.
That is the quote, so you're correct.
Hey, all right. Which is a pretty nice jump over the prior year, a little over 7% up.
7.3% increase.
There you go. Which is, again, sizable. They've talked a lot about these stats as far as test taker numbers go, and my understanding throughout has been that there aren't necessarily more people taking the test, they're just administering more exams. Yeah. People are repeating more.
Yeah, and let's look into that because I think this is going to inform part of our conversation later.
Exactly.
If you compare last year to this year in terms of their test years, which is not a calendar year, but they say that there were 9,432 more tests administered in 2018 and 2019, so the current test cycle, compared to the prior year. So 9,000 and change more. But of those tests administered, a smaller percentage were given to first-time test takers. It was 57% first-time test takers this year as compared to 61% first-time test takers last year. So ultimately, because of that, the absolute number of first-time test takers didn't increase that much. It was only by a few hundred test takers. So what's happening is there's a very similar number of first-time test takers, but there were many more tests that were repeated.
Right.
And that increase in the repeating of exams is not a big surprise, something that we expected when they got rid of the 2 times or the 3 times in 2 years policy. But I think also that rise in repeating is affecting something else we're going to talk about shortly, which is a new policy that's coming from them.
That's right.
So we'll keep that in mind and circle back to it.
Yeah, if you're doing a just straight competition head count, these numbers I think are a bit misleading, because it's not that you have so many more people fighting for seats. You have so many people willing to retake the test to try to eke out a few more points.
Yeah.
That's really what this is.
The average person is saying, I can improve my position, I'm going to do it.
That's right.
And I think that has been a great strategy over the last year or two.
Undeniably so. Yeah.
Why wouldn't you? If I'd been out there and I was trying to improve my situation, I would have kept taking the LSAT over and over.
For sure.
To try to make myself more attractive, because with the policy focused on just the highest score, why wouldn't you?
Why stop? Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're going to have a change in that, as we will talk about very soon. So let's keep moving on.
I love how much we've alluded to this. We're just dangling.
We don't want to keep alluding to it all that much. Let's talk about the other thing that they released that was at least clearly documented here. They put out another one of their famous blogs, the Law:fully blog. This one came out on June 11th, and it was called Counting Down to the Launch of the Digital LSAT.
Right.
And one of the things I like about their podcast is that they often talk about real numbers that relate to test takers. The blog less so covers what I call relatable direct test issues, but that's not the case this time. This time they actually did address issues of import for people who are taking this test. And I've said this before and I'll say it again, and I'm speaking directly to them. I love it when you guys do this. I think you should keep on doing it. I know that you see the law schools as your main clients, but let's not forget that your students and the people taking this test are really the lifeblood of the whole system, the whole process, the whole organization. They really should be the focus.
That's your customer base. Continue to treat them well.
Yeah, sometimes I'm surprised by the lack of foresight in dealing with the thousands and thousands of people who take this test, and I can only recommend that they always be put at the very front and center of anything.
Yes.
But that, sermonizing aside, and I'll step down off that soapbox for just a minute.
Just a minute,
though. I mean, I really don't.
For now, though, I think we can put them up on that soapbox because they've already gone ahead and anticipated some issues that you and I have both been pretty vocal about, warning them of, like, this is not going to be a perfect transition.
No, there's definitely fears over problems. And so they address that right in the middle of the blog. And I love this. I love the fact that they would actually come out and talk about real problems, because these are the types of fears that everybody has. And just to kind of like quote what they've said here, it says, but what if one of the tablets malfunctions during the test? And of course, everybody's like, yes.
Yeah, what if?
What happens? What if the battery somehow wasn't fully charged or the machine stops working?
Screen freezes. I mean, we could do this all day. But
yeah. And I think every one of us who's contemplated taking a digital LSAT has been like, tablets aren't exactly the most reliable machines out there. So what?
In fact, I'll do this. I'll go further than what if. I'll go what when.
Yeah.
This is going to happen.
It is definitely going to happen. There will be problems. We know this. There is zero question about it at all.
Yep.
So let's address the battery life thing, because they went off about this. First off, as you would expect, they are claiming that every tablet will be fully charged at the start of the exam, and so battery life should be more than enough for the test. As the owner of many electronic products, yes, that's totally what will happen with the first couple of usages. I'll be far more interested to see what happens in, say, 2-3 years, when you got a tablet that gets used for 3-4 hours once a month and then just goes back in storage over and over again. I think we'll not see battery problems in the early administrations. We're going to see battery problems later on. And it's not so much charging it, it's holding the charge.
Yeah, the degradation of just older lithium-ion batteries. Not to get all chemical about it, but yeah.
So they do say this, and they say that the supervisor has a controlling hub machine that will be able to tell if the tablet is running low on battery. So if they did see a problem, they can actually switch it out at any given point. And I think this tells you something that's really important that we've kind of talked about before, but I think is worth kind of addressing right here. The way these administrations occur is that the person who is proctoring the test, the main proctor, has a hub which allows them to see all the machines as they're working and they're in action, and it monitors their their battery function, their functionality, and so forth. And it also allows the supervisor to control the time. Mm-hmm. And this is how, when you start off in a testing room, the supervisor, when they go ahead and they give that signal that the test is starting, it pulses out to every machine in the room. And so everybody starts at the same time. So the sections will end at the same time for everybody. When you go to take a break, it's my understanding that the break is set at 15 minutes.
Yes.
However, if there's a problem, they could alter that. They could also pause time if there was some kind of very problematic situation that came up during the test. Let's say all the power went out.
We've talked about this before, various issues that can arise.
Yeah, all sorts of terrible things that could happen. Fire alarms going off. They would be able to pause that and then have people come back if they had to, say, evacuate the building and then return if it was a false alarm.
Right.
So they will have control. I've had students ask me, why do they even need proctors? Why, you don't really need a proctor. There's no excuses for this. You could just have everybody in the same room. I'm like, you can't. It's actually going to be room by room, controlled by different proctors. The beauty of that, though, of course, is that there's no more 5 minutes remaining. There's no more clock watching for a proctor. There's no more mistakes in giving people 30 minutes instead of 35 or forgetting to call out that 5 minutes. That's all done on the machine. There is a timer. There is a 5-minute warning that will pop up on screen for you. So
there's human oversight, but there are no more human errors. And that, to me, is one of the biggest benefits of this.
That's really well said there, I would say. Now, the other thing they talked about is, what if a machine stops working? And one of the things that we know about the way the system works is that it records and saves all your work every 10 seconds to the secure hub that the supervisor has. So if there was some type of widespread problem, or if you have a failure on your machine, you will only lose up to the last 10 seconds of work. And then the supervisor will have extra machines on hand, and they will be able to swap out the malfunctioning tablet to you almost immediately. Mm-hmm. I'd love to see that in action. I wish there was a training video that they were showing.
The same thing.
Here's how you do it. What is almost immediately in their minds? Is it 10 seconds? Is it 60 seconds? Is it, 3 minutes? I don't know. But it does tell you that if there are problems, there is recourse to fix those problems. And it's not something that you should be thinking, my tablet just died, I'm dead in the water.
Yeah,
that's not the case.
Two things to that. Number one, and this is the bigger, is that I'm really pleased to see LSAC anticipating worst case scenarios. You and I both know that they sometimes exist in this rosy glow of optimism that isn't realistic.
Yes.
So this is a good thing. They're actually starting to foresee things that can go wrong. Number two, the tablets, when I took the pilot test, were pre-assigned individually to test takers. They had your picture on there, they had your registration number, all your information. That was your tablet. I don't know how they're going to make quick switches, because they'd have to, it seems, reassign the replacement tablet to that same person. If you can kind of envision this.
There's got to be a checklist process where they can just pull down a menu, says reassign test taker, the name pops up.
One hopes. My first point, I think, maybe speaks to the second, which is I'm hoping they're anticipating a seamless way to do this.
I'm sure they are.
Yeah.
I give them credit for this,
yes.
In having anticipated the way this is going to work. They spent a lot of time on the platform, making it secure, understanding issues like accommodations and so forth that they'd have to take into account. So I think it's an interesting approach that they've taken, but I'm sure that they've considered this, because how could you not?
Well, and again, I don't want to be too mean to them here, as they're not around to defend themselves. How could you not? If there was ever a group that I could have foreseen? No? Okay, I'll stop.
Okay. I have seen things happen where I am confused, but I feel like this one's got to have been in, and clearly they're talking about malfunctioning tablets. So I'm going to just say that they have thought about this.
Yeah, good for them.
Let's move on from this. I think it's a good point to understand if you're taking that July or a later test. This is the kind of stuff that you could face, so it's good to understand it beforehand.
Yeah.
Speaking of that July test, one of the big questions that has been bouncing around is, you know that if you take the July test and cancel, you get a fee waiver. And many test takers, especially as this test is now approaching, have been asking, can I use that fee waiver to take the September LSAT if I need to? The answer has now been made clear, and the answer is no.
Yeah, where this was weird is that the July test results, which is the point at which you would cancel your score and receive this fee waiver. By the way, if anyone's wondering, a fee waiver just means a free repeat. You can take the test again without having to pay a registration fee if you cancel your July score. The registration for September occurs, or the deadline occurs, prior to the scores for July coming out. So people aren't going to know to cancel their July scores prior to their ability to register for September. And so there's been this confusion or this uncertainty about, like, well, if I register for September, can I retroactively apply my cancellation free repeat from July to it? And the answer, as Dave just said, is no.
Which is unfortunate. And I think a lot of us we knew the situation in terms of like when scores came out and versus when the registration was. But what we were hoping they would do is provide a retroactive refund.
That's right.
So that you could apply it to September, and even if you'd already paid your fee, they'd just refund it. There is precedent for this. They did that last year when they had some really tight deadlines, and they said, hey, if you've registered, we will refund it.
Yeah, they've done it several times, in fact.
The word this morning is that they have decided not to take that approach. Now, if there's enough of a protest, maybe they'll change that position. So I'm not going to say this is for all time.
Is this a rallying cry?
I don't know if this
to
is
the streets.
Hill. This is the hill we want to battle on.
No, probably not.
I think that it's conceivable there may be bigger battles coming that we'll have to watch out for. So I will say that
I see you stacking pitchforks and torches. I see you getting ready.
Lighted torches.
That's right.
But I think this is probably the way they're going to go with this. They're going to be like, look, the timing isn't going to work, so it only applies to October through April. Maybe, they change that position later on when they realize that there's going to be protest about it, or there's certainly going to be some unhappy people. But right now, that is their position.
They're running out of time. Anyway, if you do take July tests with the intention of potentially canceling and retaking, October of 2019 is going to be the first test that you can take for free.
That is correct.
So, now you know.
And going back and looking at this July, September, October lineup, that kind of moves us to our next and really, I think, most important point of the conversation, which is that there appears to be a new repeater policy that is coming down the pipeline. I'm anxiously awaiting official final confirmation of this, and it's taking them some time, which tells me they weren't ready to deal with this. So let's go ahead and give the background.
It feels like a leak, and I don't think they necessarily saw that.
It's not a leak when they leaked it.
But was it them that leaked that?
Yeah.
The picture from that conference, that was them?
It's them putting it up on a screen.
Oh,
so let's explain what happened.
All right. Well, they showed it at a conference, and someone in the audience took a picture.
Okay, that's the gist of it.
Right.
So I'll give the actual story.
Tell it.
So everyone at least understands it. LSAC has an annual meeting. This year it was in Boston. It was from May 29th to June 1st. And they've got it's a classic business conference where they have a bunch of main speakers. They have many breakout sessions. They do some networking. Exactly the kind of thing that you would expect them to hold. Well, there was a screenshot posted the other day on Reddit that was apparently or purportedly from that conference. And I've now gotten independent confirmation several times that, in fact, it was a real screenshot and it is not doctored. Something that you have to be careful with, unfortunately, in our day and age. And it came from the Thursday segment of the conference. And what it is a screen that they had put up, and they were showing it to all the attendees, which include a large number of law school personnel and admissions people and so forth. And what they were talking about was a new LSAT score repeating policy or repeater policy that is coming soon. It doesn't say when that is. Now, I've gotten follow-up word that the implementation of this is going to start in September with the September LSAT. So, not July. And in fact, one of the notes on the slide say that people who are taking the July 2019 LSAT don't have to worry about this counting towards this new policy.
Right.
But there used to be limitations on the number of times you could take the LSAT. Those were then repealed. They are now coming back, but there's a new version of it.
Yeah.
So let's go through the new version of it.
All right. Where to begin? Because there were a number of bullets on this little leaked slide.
Start at the top.
All right. Just down the list.
Yeah.
The first thing that I hope applies to you, listener, is that if you get a perfect score on the LSAT, if you hit that 180, you are no longer allowed to take the LSAT. You cannot repeat after a 180 is on your record. A wonderful problem to have.
Yeah. So it's called the perfect score test registration ban. You top out. I mean, that's the score you're shooting for. You can't do any better. What they're really saying is if you're trying to get into Yale, 180 is just as good as 2 or 3 or possibly more. So they're like, if you've hit the top, you're done.
Right.
Which
I get that. People can't just get out there to pad a resume for no good reason.
And, you know, it may throw their statistics off too. I can imagine why they would have problems with this. However, that is not going to affect the majority of people. The rest of these points
This is where things get more applicable. And I think, honestly, the most applicable of all is their shortest time limit ban, which is each year you cannot take the test more than 3 times. So they've set a ceiling on calendar year repeats. You cannot sit for the LSAT more than 3 times a year. Hello, listener. This is John. Sorry for the interruption here, but I feel it's advisable to insert a quick point of clarification before we get too deep into these new repeat limits. So bear with me for just a second, if you don't mind. Dave and I are about to cover LSAC's retake policies, and as part of that discussion, we'll be referring to the number of attempts allowed, quote, per year. And here's where things get a little odd. LSAC's year isn't based on a traditional calendar year from January 1st through the end of December. Instead, LSAC starts their year on June 1st, and it then runs through the following May. Because why do things the normal way when a thoroughly confusing alternative is available? Sigh. So, when we say that you're allowed 3 takes in a single year, what we really mean is that beginning June 1st, you're able to sit for 3 LSATs in the next 12 months, and that count then resets the following June 1st. So, for example, to illustrate how this could play out, someone testing in, say, June, July, and September of the same year, that person's done until the following June. That's their 3 attempts in that cycle, June, July, September, which means they'd have to take about 9 months off due to these restrictions. Conversely, someone who tests in, say, February, March, and May, they can test again the very next month, since as of June 1st, their count would reset. So again, if you start on the early side of this cycle, you can be done pretty quickly. If you come in at the very end of one of these cycles, you can just keep going. You could go February, March, May, June, July, if you wanted to. Since again, as of June, your count would reset. Finally, and as we will definitely discuss further, these limits begin with the September 2019 LSAT. And they are not retroactive. So, any attempts of yours prior to this September don't count towards your limits. If you've never taken the LSAT before, or if you've taken it 10 times up to this point, you're in the exact same boat. It's September where they start to track this and potentially limit how many times you can retake the test. All right, hopefully that helps clear things up a bit. So, now, back to the episode.
I really object to this idea of a maximum of 3 times in a single year. I really feel that that is an unnecessary restriction. We'll talk about why we think they put these restrictions in place in a few minutes, but 3 times in a year isn't a whole lot.
Yeah. Can I press you on your objection?
Not yet.
I was going to say, do you object to the idea of a limit period, or do you just think 3 is too severe?
Both.
Like if it was 5 times or 7 times in a year, would you be like, all right?
I could live with something like 5 or 6 times within a year. Because, I mean, seriously, they've now set up a situation where you have 10 LSATs a year.
Yeah.
So you've gone ahead and you've told everybody 10 times the LSAT is given every year and acted as if there is this great new access, which is a direct comparison to the GRE, which has continuous access.
Yep.
And so you've now said, it's like going to an amusement park and saying, look at all these fantastic rides.
Pick your top 3.
You can only ride 3, though.
Yeah.
So choose wisely. I'm like, this isn't why I go to Disney World, all right? I want to ride all the rides.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel as if it is almost like a sleight of hand, hide the ball kind of trick where it's like, we're showing you something, but you're not really showing you what it is.
Yeah, it's a buffet you're not really allowed to eat from.
Exactly. Hey, here's your buffet.
Right.
Only 3 items.
You only get 1 plate. Choose well.
You don't even really get a full plate. Come on.
Right. Well, it doesn't stop there.
No, it gets worse.
It does get worse. Number 2, as far as ceilings, limits, no test taker can sit for the LSAT more than 5 times in 5 years. So not only do you get 3 in 1 year, if you take 2 more, you're off for 5 years.
You're done.
You're done.
I
Which
mean,
is effectively a career killer, frankly.
It really is a huge delay. And I have a serious ethical objection to the idea of saying 5 in 5 years because I can hear people out there like, no, if you can't get the LSAT right in 5 times, you should give it up. I'm like, it's not about getting it right. It's about getting the best possible score.
And demonstrating who you truly are, which sometimes takes more than 5 attempts.
Takes more than 5 times, especially with the vagaries of this test and the almost random walk nature of how they emphasize certain ideas at certain times. If you have some bad events that occur and you end up canceling, and then you have a couple bad tests for you, all of a sudden the pressure's on. You might kill 4 takes that way.
Mm-hmm.
And the way this policy works, it's not about registration, apparently. It's about actually sitting for the test. So if you go in and you sit down, no matter what your result, if you take the score, if you cancel, that's going to count as one of these 5 takes.
That's right. The only way this doesn't count, as I understand it, is if you withdraw beforehand, if you haven't actually seen any of that test content.
Yeah, if you see the test, it's going to get counted. And if this was 5 times in 2 years, I'd be like, okay, I can live with that a little bit more. But it's not. It's a point that you had made, actually, John, was that if someone goes in and takes, let's say, the September and October tests, and then they're like, I'm going to take November and then January and February. And so we could get to February 2020, and you could have a test taker who is done for 5 years.
That's right. Yeah, within 6 months, almost 6 months of this recording, not quite, it's a little longer, but within 6 months, you could basically lock yourself up for 5 years.
It's such a long...
That is brutal.
Yeah, and it's just really rough. It is a policy that I saw online as described, and I think quite perfectly, as draconian.
Draconian. Yeah.
It's
and you and I could both just drop story after story. I'll give you one. I had a student in a class of mine last year who had taken the test 3 times, was about to take her 4th, and it wasn't until after her 4th attempt that she realized she qualified for accommodations. Her 5th attempt, she got those accommodations. But can you imagine the pressure of finally getting to take the test the way you deserve to take it, with time and a half in her case, and it's the last try for 5 years? Come on, man.
No pressure, man. It's all good. Just chill out.
So she went in. Unfortunately, she hit her number. She actually ended up with a 175. So I won't say her name here, but a distant high five to her. But
well, the thing is,
it didn't have to go that way. It didn't have to land in her favor.
No.
The 5th time, she finally gets the accommodation she needs, and that would have been her last attempt.
Right, but you see, in her situation, she didn't have that pressure. She could have taken
Right.
the sixth time.
Sure.
And what we're getting is a yo-yo effect. There was, years ago, a lot of pressure to do well, even on your first time, because they average scores. Then eventually they dropped that, and so the pressure was reduced. Then they added this 3 times in 2 years policy, starting to increase the pressure again. Then they dropped that. Everybody relax. Hey, if I need to take it 5 or 6 times, I can do that.
Sure.
If I have to take it more, I'm still okay. There was no kind of like looming limit. And here we go. The yo-yo swings back, and now it's like, okay, 5 times in 5 years, and you are done.
And they've leaned into this opportunistic approach by offering so many more tests.
Yeah. Well, think about the emotional
We're going to
effect
give you
on
10
people.
chances, psych. Come on.
I just don't like this. I'm not saying that it is intentionally or maliciously manipulative. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that what's happening is they keep changing policies based upon what they think is in their best interest.
Yeah.
And maybe it would be nice to think about the students just a lot more.
Yeah,
Not
I
a
don't
little
think
bit
they're
more, but a lot
ill-willed. I
more.
don't think they're malicious. I think they're capricious.
Yeah, I think this is not driven by malice, but sometimes I feel as if the policies that come out are made for them and are focused upon what they need to have done and what they think is best without really sitting down and saying, how's this going to affect the average student out there or the majority of students that are out there?
And you got to say, too, Dave, if you're the typical student out there, their motivations, who cares? It's the impact. It's the outcome. It's the practicality of this. Like, oh, they don't mean to disadvantage me, but it does.
Yeah.
They don't mean to be malicious.
Yeah, you mean LSAC's
Damn sure
motivations.
feels that way. Yeah, exactly.
No one cares. I mean, if you're a student, you don't care about their motivations. You just care about how it affects you.
Yeah, what the impact is. And in this case, the impact is decidedly negative.
Yes, and it gets even worse or weirder.
We're not even done. I know.
There
is a lifetime ban. Should we jump to it?
Yeah, let's go right to it.
If you take this test 7 times, you're done forever.
That's it. Which is a very weird policy. And this is why I'm like, the mind playing tricks on me song choice is just so apropos of this. And I thought immediately of old Bushwick.
Yeah.
So let's say you do take the next 5 LSATs that count, and you get to February of 2020 and you're out. And let's just say that you really do have this incredible desire to go to law school, and you wait the 5 years. Now, 2 things happen at that point. You then become eligible to retake the LSAT after the 5 years. Also, those 5 scores that you had previously, they begin to drop off your record.
Yeah, so this is something that actually should have occurred to me sooner and is just now. What happens if, let's say, you take it once and then 2 years later you take it 4 times over a allowable span? How does this chronology work? How does the rolling calendar of this work? If you take it 5 times in 5 years, is it as soon as that first score drops off, you've got one more attempt?
Yes. As soon as the first one passes, you can take the test again. Then when the second original test taking event passes, you can take your second LSAT.
So these strange 5-year anniversaries, basically.
Exactly. Which means that when you come back 5 years later, how many shots do you have? Do you have 3 times in a year? No.
No, you have 1 until your second attempt, and then you have 1 more. Yeah.
You get 2. You will have 2 total, and then you'll be done because you'll have had 5 original tests 5 years ago. You'll have 2 new tests. You will have reached your 7, and so you will hit the lifetime ban number of 7 total.
Yeah.
So even when those other tests roll off your record, because LSAT scores only stay on your record for 5 years, you'll be sitting there with just 2 scoring attempts, but you will have taken it 7 times, and so you are done.
Yeah, so a person with 5 scores who's waited the requisite time comes in with a clean slate. Not really.
Not. So, I don't know. It's, let's talk about why they're doing this, because I think this will help explain it, and it'll stop me from using words like arbitrary and ill-advised and so forth.
Blah, blah, blah. It's funny. It's about, 7 times in a lifetime that I've seen you get tongue-tied.
You very rarely see me this mad.
Yeah.
Although I'll make one caveat before we go on.
All right.
You can appeal. So if there is, as they term it, extenuating circumstances, you can appeal and ask for an additional take.
And somebody right now is thinking to themselves, what might qualify?
We don't know.
We don't know.
And extenuating circumstances is so arbitrary.
Yep.
And of course, the decider here isn't an independent third party. It's LSAC. They control every single aspect of this process. They're the ones that make all the decisions. And so they're judge, jury, and executioner as far as whether or not you can appeal and whether or not that appeal will be successful. It's the same thing with accommodations and a host of other things. So we can't tell you what extenuating circumstances are. I don't know whether an illness in your family would qualify, for example. I don't know whether a car crash on the way to a test center, and then you went in and you took the test woozily and didn't do well, and that was your fifth take. I don't know if that qualifies. I'm just not sure what they would say is an extenuating circumstance. So we'll just leave it.
No, but if I'm a student, I'd probably appeal after every single attempt to try to get it removed from the record. Why not?
Just to appeal?
Yeah, well, just to keep myself lower than the 7, man. Right?
Yeah, but
that's my first attempt. Didn't go great. I know I'm going to repeat. I'm not in any danger of hitting these upper limits, but I still don't want to take the chance. I'm going to appeal that first one.
Well, the score will be on your record. They're not going to remove that. You're going to have to appeal to have a retake. They're not going to listen to
appeal
appeals.
To have it not count to this overall 3 times in a year, 5 times in 5, or 7 overall. That's what I would start to appeal every time.
Well, I would say that the likely response to that is call us when you hit a limit. Right now, you can still register for the LSAT, so why are you talking to us? I mean, come on. If I was them, that would be my position. They're not going to take appeals until you can no longer take it.
I'd be fighting this from the jump.
John, as in so many things, this is probably premature on your part to have this objection.
I'm not going to make any girlfriend jokes.
I just destroyed you.
Yeah, I did. All right. You finish this on your own. I'm going to be over here in the corner.
You go cry. We'll have Lacey come over and put a wet towel on your forehead. All right. So
on that note, why are they doing this? Why are you so mean, and why is LSAC doing this? I have lots of questions.
You slaughtered me about 2 or 3 weeks ago. This is just payback.
It's fine, yeah.
Oh, I'm loving it.
Turnaround's fair play. Here we go. I have a couple of hunches as to why they would do this. One, it has to do with something we started this conversation with, which is that you're getting more and more repeaters these days than ever before. I think they're trying to set some kind of limit on that. Because right now it feels a little Wild West. People can just do as they please, continue to return to the old buffet, as it were, and take more stabs at it.
That's exactly right. And, the limitation that LSAC has put on this, I think, is very harsh, in part because other tests like the GRE allow you to have more takes per year.
They do.
But there is a clear issue that we are seeing, and that is a greater number of people are repeating the test every year. And that's because they can improve their position. And we know how important the LSAT is to scholarships and financial aid. It's a huge driver of that. And if you can eke out another point or two, honestly, it's almost always worth it to retake the LSAT. So you're seeing those repeater numbers rise. We talked about that earlier in this episode. That has a number of detrimental effects. Certainly one of them is it starts to shift the percentages that they see on their bell curve. And I'm sure that's something that the psychometrics department is looking at and thinking, we don't love this. We don't want to see people take the LSAT 8, 9, 10 times.
Right.
And with the pathway that we have been on, that was going to occur. I don't think it's going to occur now.
We can't.
Because apparently you only can take it 7 times.
But you're right. The symmetry to the bell curve they try to keep more or less in place, stable, was beginning to shift. It started to look a little more like a cresting wave to the 180 side than this, perfectly balanced mountain in the middle.
And that's a problem they've had in the past before, too. So this is a real concern.
When they changed from the 10 to 48 scale, it's in part because there were so many 48s.
Yeah, it had reached a point where it was no longer a bell, it was sliding up, and they don't want to have that happen. And so I think that's definitely part of what we're looking at. I think the other part goes back to something that you and I have used to our advantage in the past to make predictions about this test. And in fact, that we will use
Looking
to make
at you,
predictions.
July. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll use it to make predictions about the July LSAT. And that is when you put these kinds of limits on retaking it, and then you also have 10 LSATs a year. We've talked about how much pressure there is to make tests and how difficult it is. 10 tests a year is a brutal schedule. I can only imagine the test development department was like, oh man, our lives are over. Well, if you want to really be able to reuse tests effectively, one of the things you need to stop is for people to have the ability to just take a huge number of them. And
That's
so by putting these limits in place, they naturally restrict the ability of any individual test taker to encounter an exam that they've seen or had administered previously.
Yeah, to maybe clarify that a little bit, it is exceptionally difficult to come up with an entirely new LSAT. It's expensive. It takes a ton of time. It's really hard to do because, again, they're under the burden of keeping these things consistent. So, to do 10 of these a year, they're going to have to reuse tests. There's just no way around it.
Yeah. And they've been doing that.
And they have been doing it. Yeah. I mean, we've seen this over and over in the past couple of years. It's going to escalate as I see it.
I think so too. And this really dovetails with that idea extremely well.
Yeah. What do you do if you're going to use a test someone could have seen 2 years ago? You make sure they're not allowed to see it. They're not allowed to sit.
Which suggests that the repeat cycle on this could be as low as 2 years.
That's right.
On test because, you know, you could imagine that kind of thing happening. I don't think it will be. I think it'll be more like 3 or 4 years.
I do too,
But there are known instances of test takers in the past encountering an LSAT that they had taken before. This has happened. I know this for a verifiable fact. But then that's a terrible thing, honestly, for the rest of the test-taking population because that person's score is going to be much higher. If you've seen the test before, and if you're a fairly decent test taker, you're going to remember, hey, all right, I remember what to do. You would have self-analyzed the first time around.
Right. Or I should have done this the first time, but now I get a second crack at it.
Yeah, and even if it's 2 or 3 years later, you come back and see it, you're going to score really and you're going to have an improvement on that test.
This is that game that stumped me the first time, but I figured out that afternoon.
Yeah. They don't want to have that happen.
Right.
And so this policy of limiting the number of retakes actually helps enforce that in a way that doesn't look like it's being enforced.
Yeah, there are elements to this too that I think lend further credibility to it. For instance, of the 10 tests a year, only 3 are going to be disclosed, released. That means 7 of these they keep in the vault, making them ripe for reuse.
Yeah, and once they have a reasonable canon or catalog of tests, they're right back to only having to make several a year.
Yeah.
I mean, they got to make a minimum of 3. I know they make more than that because there have been Sabbath tests and all sorts of things. Sure. So they're not making just 3 tests a year. But this certainly is a long shot from having to make 10 or more tests a year that, you know, that they'd be in this position if everything was being disclosed or if people could take every single test. So this really works in their favor when we look at it from this perspective. And I think between the repeater numbers rising and the for sure reuse of tests down the line, this kind of helps explain why this policy is coming back in vogue.
Because it's self-defeating on a financial level. Why would you not want people to pay you more money to take more tests? This is an explanation for that.
If your costs of test development were higher than those fees or expected fees. That's right. One possible reason.
Yeah.
And then all this rest of this.
So, interestingly enough, I can at least see a little bit of method to this madness, but I still hardly disagree with it.
No, I still don't like it. I'd still like to see at least more tests a year and a more generous number of takes over a shorter period of time.
Do you think they're receptive to protest? I want to put that more delicately, and clearly just didn't. But do you think if people actually got out in front of this thing and they were like, no, like if there was a picket, you know?
Well, I don't think they're receptive to protest. I think they will simply fall back on the not unreasonable position of saying this is what we have to do. And if we have identified the reasons correctly,
Mm-hmm.
they have some motivation for doing this. I can tell you where we might see protest, and
Effective protest? I know where we're going to see protest, but where do you think it might matter?
well, I think it might show up. One of the big questions that's come out about this is because, and there's no clarification on it as of yet, is whether or not this policy is retroactive.
Mm.
Now, one of the first questions that came up was from students who said, I've already taken the LSAT twice this year. Does this mean that I only have one more take after July? And our thought on this has been, no, it's not retroactive, that this is something that they're doing going forward for the digital test. But as of this writing, I don't have final confirmation on that from LSAC. I am awaiting a communication from them that they're clearly working on, and it's taking some time. So I know it's not necessarily the easiest thing.
It makes me a little nervous that they haven't just said no to that one.
Well, you've just echoed my feeling. You know, we may be coming back and doing an amendment to this podcast where we're like, well, you couldn't have imagined it, but it's retroactive. And so
I
if
really
you've
do
taken the
struggle
LSAT,
to imagine it.
I can't imagine it. If somebody's taken the LSAT 5 times right now, they basically would be over and out.
You and I both know people who've got 7 on their record. Can you imagine just turning those people and being like, oh yeah, by the way, bye forever?
Yeah, I do not think it will be retroactive, and I sure hope I'm not wrong about that. So,
yeah.
Anyway, we'll have to see about that, because that will be an interesting moment. If that occurs and it is retroactive, I think there will be widespread protest, and they may at least modify the policy. But my expectation is, at worst, they would say this policy starts in September of 2017, and if it had any
2019.
backwards,
Yeah.
What year am I in? 2019. And if it does have any backwards looking focus, it would only be through this year, so starting in 2019.
And I don't even think that's
and I don't think they'll do that.
Yeah, okay, good.
I think it'll start in September, and it will be for all tests moving forward.
Yeah, the counter turns on.
Yeah, so in that sense, test takers who've been taking the exam over the last year, they're the last of the, we're going to have more than the 3, 5, 7 going forward. So that's just, it's a little crazy. This is what I meant earlier when I said the situation recently has been so fluid. It tells me a lot about the preparations that have been occurring for this July test. When there's so many things that are not final, that gives me a clear case of concern. I'm worried, to be honest with you, about what's going to happen in July and going forward. This is such a big change. It seems like another year of preparation on their part would have been really nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, dude, we're weeks out from the first digital tests, and their test software doesn't even score your results.
Well,
give me a break.
We're weeks out from the digital test, and they cannot tell us how many pages are in a scratch paper booklet. Is it 8? Is it 12? Is it 16? Yeah. We don't know, and their response is it has not been confirmed. And I think that's actually a great place to kind of move to next, is to talk a little bit about, amazingly enough, I can't believe I'm having a conversation about scratch paper.
Yeah, I mean, I laughed a second ago so that I wouldn't cry. Jesus.
Let us talk about scratch paper, things that you did not think that would ever be important in your LSAT.
Or that would be mysterious, at least. Like, how is this not answered?
This is an unknown.
Come on.
Let's talk a little bit about it, because there's been a lot of uncertainty, and there still is, to be honest with you. This is what we know about scratch paper for digital LSAT test takers. You will receive a scratch paper booklet. Okay. We know that it's one of those booklets that's almost like the old LSATs were given, where it's an 8.5 by 11 set of sheets. The paper that they used last time was this kind of like thin, tissuey brown paper, just like the test was.
Yeah,
very
it's
very
the
light.
same test booklet paper.
Yeah, we foresee that it's going to be exactly the same as that. When they did the digital field test and you took that, that was the booklet that they gave you.
That's right. Yeah, it'd be like if you took a piece of paper and recycled it about 60 times.
Yes. Now, the pages are unlined, so it's basically a big blank page that you're dealing with.
Like 1-ply toilet paper would be an upgrade.
Yeah. You will not be allowed to take that scratch paper with you, by the way.
That's true. They will collect your booklet at the end of the test with your tablet. To me, I now in retrospect wish I had done a count. Not that it would have held true, because clearly all these policies are in flux. It was about 16 pages or so, I think, when I took it. About 8 pages stapled, so
It would make sense.
front, back, something like that. Count on, though, at least a dozen front and back pages of unlined crappy paper.
Which is honestly, if you have, let's say it's 12, that's enough.
If you think about it, that's 2 pages per logical reasoning, a page per game, and a page per reading comp passage set. That's plenty.
I think that would be just fine. I'm not saying that, I wouldn't appreciate more than 12. I'd love to see more like 16.
I think it is more than 12, but...
Yeah. We just don't know. And LSAC has written explicitly, we cannot confirm the number of pages at this time. And looking at the fact that we're in the middle of June and we're talking about a huge test coming in the middle of July, I'm just astonished by the lack of certainty there.
It's amateur hour.
Now, when you took the field tests, they made a comment that you could get an extra booklet if you ran out of scratch paper, correct?
I asked that, yeah. I said, what happens if someone fills this up and needs a new thing? Because on the GRE or the GMAT, where you also get, it's not quite scratch paper, it's these little highlighter marker tablet things. But they will give you more if you need it. No question. You just raise your hand, they bring you more. I was told that you could get another booklet. It seems perhaps that might not be the case, although the language of this is still a little, to me, ambiguous.
Yeah, they've said there will be no additional scratch paper, and I've asked for clarification on this. The response that
to explain my own perhaps uncertainty with what that might mean, I think there's a way to read the phrase "no additional scratch paper" as no other or alternative forms of scratch paper. In other words, you can't bring your own. We're not going to have loose leaf sheets. That doesn't necessarily mean we won't provide you another booklet of the same type.
Yeah. Does a no additional scratch paper mean no extra booklet or no other category of scratch paper?
Right.
Yours,
no
mine.
form.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Who knows? And that's part of the problem that we run into here is the fluidity of the situation and the uncertainty of what we're looking at. It's making everybody nervous. I would love to have seen a really clear communication plan that said there are going to be natural questions about this. They are certainly going to heat up in June and July, and we're going to make all of this very clear. In a certain respect, I feel as if they've been caught somewhat unawares. The repeater policy, which they showed to their own attendees at their conference, they had no response when asked about whether or not it's official, whether or not it's real. As I've said before, we've gotten confirmation that it's real. Here we're talking about scratch paper of all things, and we don't have answers. So if little things like this, and they are relatively big when it comes to taking the test, are uncertain, it worries me about all the other details that are floating around out here.
Yeah, a little in the grand scheme, but significant in terms of I'm a test taker who wants to do my best. Jeez.
Yeah. Now, of course, the word is that you will be able to use pencils. You can bring in your own pencils to use on the scratch paper, so you're not constrained to just using the pen that is built into the stylus.
Another change, by the way, that was not the case when they first rolled out these digital tests that I took. It was you were with the pen that they gave you, and that was it.
Yeah, so they're still making changes, and as we get updates, we'll go ahead and shoot them out, usually by, either on our Twitter accounts or here on the podcast, what have you. But this is the kind of thing where there's just going to be some uncertainty for a while, and we're just going to have to keep on working on getting answers from them. We have the contacts. Sometimes they give us answers. Sometimes it takes a while. I think they're doing their best, but I don't think they have the answers in a lot of instances. They have to turn around and ask somebody who's higher up the chain to give them information. So it's no knock on them. I think they're probably frustrated too if I was in their shoes.
To be frustrated by questions that you should have seen coming that's a really tough sympathy for me to roll out. Am I being too harsh?
If they're also the decision maker on that process, then you're not being too harsh. If they are not the decision maker, then it's not their fault.
You mean the individual, not the organization.
the
Yeah,
organization.
I'm not dropping individual names here.
Fair
I'm
enough.
Like, so,
I often think about
Bob
them
Smith
as like
over
the
there at
people I know.
LSAC is really...
Yeah. As far as individuals, no, I wouldn't blame certain individuals for a lack of response. I'm sure they're like, I wish I knew.
Yeah.
Organizationally and on the whole, well, yeah, it's totally their fault.
Yeah. What I can say is that clearly you and I are on top of this, best we can be.
Best anybody can be.
Yeah. So for those out there feeling a little caught in this whirlwind of uncertainty, we've got you covered as best we can cover you.
It's a rolling ball that's been covered
guarantee.
with grease, and it's going down a hill.
That's right.
But we're standing on top of it. And we don't know which direction it's going to go either, by the way. It could go to the left or the right.
That's right.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to the conclusion of this episode, which amazingly enough was all about LSAC. So I didn't really think that we would go this long or this hard on them, but it's necessary. These are the questions of the times these days, and so this is the relevance.
Yeah, and I know I speak for you in saying that we're rooting for them to get this right. We desperately want to see this done well. We think they have the opportunity. I know they have the capacity, the ability to do this right.
They mean well.
Right.
I believe that, and I know that there's some people out there who are like, no, they don't. I don't think that's the case. I think they want to do things the right way. I think a lot of this comes from a really positive, progressive view of how they would like to see this test used. But as with any bureaucracy, sometimes the decisions come down and they feel arbitrary or maybe not as well thought out as we'd all like to see. And that's part of the reason that we've seen changes. I mean, the use of pencil in the scratch paper, I would imagine, was originally a decision where they're like, no, we don't want any extra things. And then they're like, why do we have that policy?
Yeah. I think the reversal of course there too was born of the fact that people really raised a fuss.
We talked about it quite a bit.
I know we did. So if that motivates anything, perhaps it's noise.
Well, we'll have to see. If there is a point of protest that's needed, we'll certainly be on the front lines of it. Let's hope.
Happy to lay this torch.
Yeah, I hope that their good intentions here, and them trying to make this test more accessible, more secure, more reliable even. I hope they all come to fruition. So on that note, we'll call it a day. And I'll say, if you get a chance to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube, or any other place that you find it in the universe, please go ahead and do so. We would really appreciate it. Give us a rating if you get a chance. If you have any questions, please send those to lsat@powerscore.com or lsatpodcast@powerscore.com. We hope that you have a great week, and thanks very much for listening. Take care.